Okay, so let's get specific. We'll go broad brush first of all. What are the big changes that were made? What is this new pyramid? Tell me the details on that, and then we'll get into some more specifics after that.
So the biggest change is the protein correction. And so the old guidelines were more reflective of the RDA's recommendation. So I believe it was 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein per day, which is not a whole lot. In most
grams per kilogram of body weight.
Yes.
Per day. Okay.
Exactly. And so we have often discussed that we felt that was too low. Many, authorities in the health and wellness space agreed that that was probably too low for most people, let alone if you have, performance-oriented goals or muscle building goals, then these recommendations are skewed a little bit higher. Now, as far as, the evidence being crystal clear, that, you need 1.2 grams per kilogram per day to live a healthy life. I think some of that is a stretch. And so for these guidelines to now put forth a much larger range, which is now 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram a day, I think some of the experts just have, some issue with maybe where some of those conclusions were made, where some of that data was pulled. I don't particularly disagree with that. I mean, a lot of the sarcopenia research has, recommendations much higher than this. But again, this is a kind of a subset of the population that they're anabolically resistant. It's hard for them to put muscle mass on regardless of exercise and, dietary intake. It can be treated, but this is a much more situation. This is a situation where you'd have to be much more aggressive. Mm-hmm. So in the guidelines, they really draw from that end of the spectrum. Like, we want to prevent anabolic resistance. We want to prevent things like sarcopenia. Those that are sarcopenic have to eat this much protein. So I think that's where a lot of this is born.
Okay.
But I don't really view that as a inflammatory recommendation per se. For some people, it's
quite the contrary, actually.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
For some, it's going to be, it's going to feel like a lot more. This puts 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. For context, it's not quite a gram.
Put it in American units.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite 1 gram per pound body weight, but it's pushing closer to that. So if you're 150 pounds, that means 150 grams of protein, or 130. Yeah. And so it's a big jump for those that were actually paying attention to this beforehand. There's some of the kidney concern, the kidney health pushback on higher protein diets, but I don't really think it's necessary to go deep into that. But
it seems like the general consensus is that more protein is better.
Yes. So yeah, a lot of this protein, the change in the protein recommendation does just, it uses some of the research even that we talked about as far as muscle protein synthesis. And in order to, essentially after or while eating a meal, after eating a meal, after exercising, in order for the exercise, in order for the protein to actually drive a response that allows you to maintain or build muscle, like there needs to be a certain amount of leucine, there needs to be a certain amount of protein, it needs to be spaced out a certain amount of time, certain distance throughout the day to make sure each, you give your body enough time basically to elicit the response that you want. So it's just funny, it's like all of a sudden now we kind of get which is like common in the vernacular of the bodybuilding and the optimizer space, that now it's like right here in the guidelines, almost like referencing some of the same things I think is interesting. But yeah, not a very I think for some it probably is, but eating a little more protein, I don't think is the craziest, is the craziest thing.
Well, a wise person often talks about what are you replacing it with. And
right.
It seems like replacing some of the other stuff you're eating with lean protein just is generally a good idea.
Right.
If you eat more protein, you're probably eating less of the other stuff that isn't as good for you. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Exactly. Now, that's a good segue into the fat discussion. So some of the fat changes.
Yep. Dietary fat specifically.
Yes.
Yes.
If you look, as you're listening to this, if you look at the pyramid, like I mentioned, you'll see a little container of ground beef. You'll see a big ribeye steak right at the top of the pyramid. This kind of flies right in the face of some of the things that I've said on the shows and what I recommend to people. It kind of flies in the face of maybe what some other countries have recommended. It flies in the face of some of the overarching evidence that I think is available at this time.
Okay.
And so for it to just be right there as a new recommendation, if you will, or an updated recommendation is interesting because you mentioned eating more protein is likely going to displace some other nutrient. And sure, you could make the argument that eating a steak is better than a Pop-Tart, right? Like what are you replacing it with? That conversation. The issue is we have a little bit of a mathematical problem here, and I'll explain that. And for people who track their calories or for a little more privy to nutrition labels and such, that you can make sense of this. You want people to eat more protein, great.
Yep.
But then the sources of protein that you are most glaringly recommending are those that just have a proclivity to higher saturated fat contents. So they want us to, I didn't mention it yet, but as far as fat recommendations, a push for full fat dairies, which has not been the case for a while. It's more of this low fat, you know the labels.
Yep.
Which in and of itself, I'm not saying is perfect either.
Right.
But when you you skew this the other way, and it's eat more protein, eat more dairy, but not just dairy, whole fat dairy, 3 servings of dairy a day, red meats, ground meats, cheeses. So sure, yeah, you're gonna hit that 1.6 grams per kilogram or 0.8 grams grams of protein per pound of body weight. You're gonna hit that no problem. But then you're gonna be hit into a range of saturated fat intake that is either higher than you're accustomed to or higher than what's currently being recommended. So there's a genuine mathematical conundrum here that's occurring.
Yeah.
Right.
In caloric terms, like we know that a gram of protein is roughly 4 calories, I think. Something, it just, if it's pure protein, it's about 4 calories. And then fat is similarly very calorically dense.
More than double.
Yeah.
9 grams.
Right.
Or excuse me, 9 calories per gram.
So if you have a lot of protein and a lot of fat, you're having a lot of calories.
So there's the calorie part.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting, there's a little section in the incorporate healthy fats portion. And this says, quote, in general, saturated fat consumption should not exceed 10% of total daily calories. So I don't really see how you do that.
That's going to be difficult to do.
It is. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's going to take being very thoughtful, right? Now, the other end of this, and I'm just pointing out firstly here the paradox, the kind of the contradiction that's occurring. There are most people in the camp that has pushed the new guidelines, they would probably tell you that the 10% recommendation just needs to go altogether. Yeah. And at this point, I mean, I would have rather just seen it go, because now if you're talking to people who count calories or are familiar with just kind of the nerdiness of some of this, then it's going to be a challenge. But again, they would probably just tell you to forget it. It's not the saturated fat that's driving, dietary cholesterol that's driving blood cholesterol levels to increase. That's not what's driving atherosclerosis. It's the oxidized LDL that's causing atherosclerosis. It's the seed oils that are oxidized, and that's what's causing the problem. So it's like the tip of the iceberg of what's the big dietary people are fighting over.
I think this, one of the things that's interesting is that this change has really just allowed the public, if they're paying attention, to see just how much conflict there is.
The polarity
behind the scenes. And the reason why so many people are so confused, why eggs are good, no eggs are bad, no coffee's good, no coffee's, like the endless string of counter recommendations, people are getting a chance to go, oh, there really are radically different opinions.
Right.
Based, generally speaking, based on science, maybe not all good science, varying levels and qualities, but there's evidence and counter evidence for all of this stuff, and it's constantly being discussed and debated, and now everybody gets to see it just a little bit.
Yep, exactly. I'm hoping, a lot of people, they would have looked at the 9-page summary instead of the 90-page summary or overview and said, and would have had no concept of any of this that's going on. But like you're saying, if at the very least you just see that we're, talking about the divisiveness that something as simple as dietary guidelines reveals, it's fascinating.